The first rain of the season poured down over the Colorado mountains like a cold omen that summer had ended. The wind swept through the tall, slender pines, carrying the musty scent of fallen leaves and cracked cliffs. Ridge Valley Animal Rescue Center, perched on a slope 20 miles of mountain road from the nearest town, had long been the place that held on to the last hope for abandoned creatures. But after the pandemic, even this place was exhausted. The kennels exceeded capacity. Resources were drained. The list of dogs waiting for assistance was so long it had to be extended by hand onto the edge of the already full whiteboard. Then that morning, when the animal control truck pulled up to the back gate, everything fell even quieter than usual. Luis, an animal control officer, stepped down, his eyes distant. In the truck bed sat a small iron crate, tilted precariously, as if one more jolt could burst it open. Inside was a creature that resembled a dog, but no longer looked like one. Echo didn't know where he was, didn't know how long he had been moved, didn't understand who had taken him or why. He knew only one thing. He had to shrink himself down, as small as possible, as hidden as possible. That skin and bone frame curled tightly in the corner of the crate, legs tucked against his belly, neck drooping as if he wanted to disappear. The once sleek black-gray coat was now matted, patches of wrinkled skin exposed, muddied with dirt and claw marks. His neck was swollen, riddled with scars, where an old collar had once cut into the flesh like a ring of torment. "What case is this?" asked Marlene, the shelter director, with no expectation of a gentle answer. Luis shook his head. "Found near the old military base, where Camp Bravo was shut down last year. The property was seized. Neighbors didn't know if anyone still lived there. This one survived alone for at least a few months. Microchip? Yes, but corroded. Couldn't read the number. No name, no history. Reaction? None. No aggression, no resistance. But when approached, he shuts off. Shuts off. Not the fearful kind, not trembling with anxiety, but the kind of fear so deep it forces the body to unplug from all sensation just to avoid collapsing in front of others. When someone tried to remove the collar, Echo didn't growl, didn't bite, didn't flinch. He just lay there like a carcass. Only his half-closed eyes remained, not fully shut, as if guarding something only he could see. The collar was cut off. It required mild sedation. His neck was inflamed, the skin weeping. His entire body was depleted. Nutrition level, 2 out of 9, near the point of no return. But for Echo, the wound wasn't in the neck. It was in the eyes. Echo's eyes didn't look at anyone. No flicker of defiance, not even reflex. Just a gaze so hollow it chilled to the bone, like a void, bottomless, formless, soundless, and within that void he may have lost himself a long time ago. Kennel 14, in the isolated wing at the back of the shelter, was reserved for long-term recovery cases. Echo was placed there. No restraints, no leash. Just an old mattress, a bowl of water, and food in the corner. But he wouldn't eat if anyone was there. Wouldn't drink. Wouldn't even glance. When someone entered, Echo would immediately retreat to the corner. His body stiffened, tail curled tightly to his belly. Eyelids twitched continuously. Breath shallow, trembling. His body held on to only one instinct. To survive, but not to connect. 3 days passed. No change. 4 days. Still the same. Kelsey, the behavior specialist, had worked with many fearful dogs. But with Echo, she couldn't find a single door to knock on. No waiting gaze, no response to reward or punishment, no interest in food, scent, or voice. He doesn't want to exist with humans. Security cameras revealed Echo only left the corner of his kennel between 2 and 4 a.m., when the entire shelter was asleep. He moved in slow, circular steps, hugging the wall, never touching anything. Just walking, as if to reassure himself he was still alive, even if no one knew it. On Marlene's printed file, the behavioral assessment had one red line. Recovery potential, very low, unapproachable, not suitable for community adoption, awaiting final decision by weekend. But just when someone was about to label Echo as a lost case, he shivered faintly. A breeze slipped through the kennel's crack, causing the water bowl to tremble. Echo twitched an ear. His eyes blinked very faintly, as if some part of him still hadn't completely shut down. Some part of him was still listening to the world, even if only through a single breath. At night, when the rescue shelter went dark, when the voices faded along with the light and warmth, the place where Echo remained became unusually silent. A kind of silence not meant for peace, but rather the invisibility of things long forgotten. In the corner of his kennel, Echo did not sleep, did not stir, did not stretch his legs, did not rest his head. He simply lay there. Head pressed to the cold floor, eyes neither fully closed nor open, as if clinging to the last bit of awareness he had left to defend himself, to exist, to wait, or maybe just because he couldn't risk missing whatever might happen. But what could possibly happen to a creature the world had already turned its back on? The infrared camera recorded the motion. Around 2 a.m., when wind swept through the cracks in the roof, when no footsteps echoed along the cold tile hallway, Echo began to move. Not stand, just inch forward, millimeter by millimeter, first his ears, then his neck, then a slow stretch of his front legs. He didn't stretch or yawn like a normal dog. Every movement resembled a broken machine trying to locate a starting point. He walked in a tight circle along the walls of the kennel. 4 paws on the floor made no sound. Tail tucked, eyes downcast, as if even the floor was watching him, and Echo no longer wanted to disturb anything. He paused in front of the water bowl, sniffed for a long time, then took a small lick. But afterward, he stepped back, retreating to the same corner, as though that single action had already exceeded the limits allowed for a wounded being. No one could say exactly what Echo feared. Perhaps the sound of the crate locking when he was first captured. Perhaps the smell of antiseptic on a vet's hands. Or maybe the distant explosions that once shook the ground where he had served. Whatever it was, it didn't exist in the kennel room, but it lived in every cell of Echo's body. Kelsey, reviewing the surveillance footage the next morning, paused at one particular moment. Echo slowly turned his head toward the kennel door. No one was standing there. Just emptiness. But his eyes lingered there for a very long time. "He's listening," Kelsey said to Marlene. "Listening to what?" "Maybe just the echo of himself." On the 7th day after Echo was brought in, Dr. Caitlin Chen offered her assessment. "His physical condition has temporarily stabilized. External wounds are healing faster than expected. But inside..." She trailed off. Her gaze moved to the window that looked into the isolation wing, where Echo lay like a shadow inside a square of light. "Some creatures don't need to die to disappear. Echo has already vanished from this world. What remains is a shell." That afternoon, a small group of local volunteers came for a short visit. They passed by the kennels, handing out treats, calling each dog by name. The other dogs barked happily, jumping up, pawing at the fences. But Echo didn't move. He didn't bother to lift his head, even when a child knelt down and gently asked, "Hey, little buddy, what's your name?" No name, no response, no presence. But if you looked closely, he blinked. Once. and for a creature who had withdrawn entirely from the world, a single blink could be a quiet knock on the door still shut. Marlene added a new line in the internal journal. Echo has not returned, but I have a feeling he hasn't completely left either. The early morning air in the Colorado mountains carried a quality Mira Caldwell always found familiar, even though she had never truly lived there. On the dirt road leading up to Ridge Valley Shelter, a silver mist lay like a delicate shawl draped across the valley. The crunch of tires over gravel echoed faintly through the pine forest. Mira turned off the engine, sitting in the cab for a few minutes more. Her hand rested on a brown, leather-bound notebook, its corners worn and softened with age, but the title on the cover still clear. Notes, Lillian Caldwell. Her mother's name. Lillian Caldwell, a quiet, gentle woman who remained almost invisible in Mira's memory. She passed away when Mira was only 13. But from scattered recollections, evenings when her mother wrote under a soft yellow lamp, the times she stroked Mira's hair so slowly while she slept, Mira had always carried the sense that her mother once belonged to a place far removed from the cramped city apartment they had called home. And this notebook was proof of that. Inside, slanted and composed handwriting spoke softly of the days her mother had volunteered at Ridge Valley Rescue Center in the late 1990s. There was an old dog who hadn't eaten for 3 days. I sat by the kennel, said nothing, just read a few lines from an old book. The next morning he ate. I don't know if I healed them, but sometimes just being beside a creature without asking anything is enough. Mira had read those lines so many times she knew them by heart. That was why she came here. An internship, yes. Graduation requirements, also yes. But the real reason was something else. She wanted to walk the same place where her mother had once placed her hands on forgotten beings. She wanted to sit in that old brick hallway, to listen to the distant barking, the sound of footsteps on wood floors, the wind sweeping through the screen door, and wait for something to echo back. The center's director, Marlene, shook her hand during the short interview. "This shelter's small, understaffed, and sometimes a little isolated," she said. "You've probably heard. Many people transfer out after a week." Mira smiled. "I don't plan on transferring." Marlene looked at her for a few seconds. Maybe, in her eyes, something had clicked. "You are Lillian's daughter, aren't you?" Mira nodded. "She once saved a dog that everyone thought was a lost cause. That dog lived another 3 years. We have a picture of it in the dining room. You'll see it." That afternoon, Mira was given a tour of the entire shelter. She walked slowly, not out of curiosity, but because each step felt like tracing a map without marked paths, a map of memories she never lived, but somehow remembered. Each kennel was an untold story, confused eyes, drooped ears, trembling paws. All of it made Mira feel as if, somewhere in that breath-filled space, a part of her mother still quietly lived. She placed her hand on a white-painted brick wall, its cool, gritty surface making her heart skip a beat. She didn't know exactly where her mother had once sat in this building, which dog she had stroked, or what final words she may have whispered to a creature about to leave. But here, every brick felt soaked in the breath of things left unsaid. Mira didn't believe in the supernatural, but something deeper, more primal, beyond words, made her unable to deny the quiet presence. Like an echo from the past, not ringing from memory, but resonating from this very moment. As she passed the isolation wing, where the wind barely reached, Mira stopped in front of a kennel with no nameplate. No one introduced it, no files, no description, just a wire mesh and a shadow in the far corner. She didn't try to look closely. She didn't need to. There was something that made her spine chill, not with fear, but a sense of being watched in return. watched by something without a name. Kelsey noticed Mira standing too long by Kennel 14. She hesitated, ready to speak, but said nothing. Mira looked like someone listening to a melody in a frequency only she could hear. "That one's a tough case," Kelsey finally whispered. "He doesn't have a name yet." Mira turned. "No name?" "No one's been able to stay close to him long enough to give one." Mira bent slightly. She didn't press her face to the mesh, didn't lean forward, just tilted her head gently. A faint sound, like claws tapping cement, came from the corner. A shadow moved. Not clearly. Just a blur. But to Mira, it was like a word whispered without full voice inside her mind. "Did she know?" Mira asked suddenly. Kelsey blinked. "Who?" "My mother. Did she know there are things that, even if you can't name them, still exist and never fade?" Kelsey didn't answer. She didn't fully understand the question, but sensed it would be wrong to interrupt whatever had just touched Mira. After her first afternoon, Mira returned to her small rented room halfway up the mountain. The night wind here hissed gently through the window bars. A sound not everyone could tolerate, but to Mira, it was like the forest's lullaby, telling her stories of creatures that quietly endured. She reopened her mother's journal. Flipping through slowly, she noticed for the first time the passages she hadn't read carefully before. Not stories, but quiet monologues without an audience. "Sometimes the dog doesn't need us to save it. It just needs to know we're still there." Mira lightly touched that line, just as she had touched the air inside Kennel 14. Not to save, not to call, just to be there. The next morning, returning to the shelter, Mira didn't say much. She simply pointed to Kennel 14 and asked, "May I sit here?" "He won't respond," Kelsey warned. "I know." Mira pulled over a small folding chair. She didn't sit facing the kennel. Didn't stare. Just placed the chair 3 meters away, slightly angled, and sat down. She held her mother's journal. Her gaze fixed on the distant yard. Echo, in the corner, didn't move. But there was a blink. Software wind drifted down the long hallway, brushing past Mira's hair, letting a few strands slide across her cheek. She didn't tuck them back, because in that moment, she feared she might interrupt something fragile that was trying to survive. After 20 minutes, Mira stood up. She didn't say goodbye, didn't wave, just took a single step back, bowing her head slightly. Echo didn't move from the corner, but after Mira disappeared from the doorway, the camera recorded this. Echo turned his head, not toward the direction she had gone, but to where she had once sat. And in that damp, cold concrete room, no one heard it clearly. But if one listened deep enough, maybe they would hear a faint echo, very faint, but enough to name something that had never truly been lost. That sentence kept repeating in Mira's mind like a silent breath as she returned to Ridge Valley Shelter the next morning. No one had called her, no assigned shift, no scheduled meeting with Kelsey or Doctor Caitlin. It was just one step, then another. And then she stood at the far end of the corridor, where Kennel 14 lay quiet like a forgotten crack in the wall of the world. Mira brought only one thing with her, her mother's journal. This time not to read, just to hold in her hand like an open gateway. The corridor was quieter than usual. The scent of antiseptic still lingered, but had faded. Sunlight slanted gently through the screen door, casting faint stripes of light across the gray cement floor. Mira stopped in front of Kennel 14. She didn't call out, didn't step closer, didn't speak or try to coax. She simply sat in the same spot as before, 3 meters away, slightly to the side, her gaze turned away, but her heart was entirely focused inward. Inside the kennel, Echo still lay curled in the shadowed corner, where the light could not reach. But today, Mira no longer felt him as invisible. On the contrary, she sensed his presence, not with her eyes, but with that vague instinct we feel when someone is watching us from behind, even when we don't turn around. She didn't know if Echo remembered her, but she remembered the feeling from the day before, the sense that something had echoed back from the deepest part of him. And she was here to quietly answer. No communication, no progress. To an outside observer, it would seem pointless, a young woman sitting silently in front of a closed kennel, while the creature inside paid her no attention. But Mira didn't need anyone to validate it, because she wasn't sitting there to heal. She was sitting to be allowed to exist. For Echo, that was everything. A soft sound behind her made Mira startle. Kelsey had arrived, holding a folder. "He still hasn't moved?" she asked, her voice nearly a whisper. "No," Mira replied quietly. "But today, something's different." "Different how?" "The silence today isn't like yesterday." Kelsey looked inside. Echo was still lying down, his head between his paws, eyes half open. But something in his posture had shifted, softened, less guarded, as if he no longer curled into himself to shield against the pain, but simply let himself lie on the cold floor. It wasn't a sign of progress, not by any behavior manual. But it was a whisper, an echo, very faint, sent back from the place where he'd once been muted. Kelsey walked away. Mira remained. She thought of her mother. Perhaps she too had once sat like this, beside a creature that didn't look at her, didn't thank her, didn't come closer, just allowed her to be present. Mira took off her light jacket, folded it, and placed it beside her. The breeze slipped in more gently than yesterday. It no longer carried antiseptic, but the scent of pine and sun. Echo stirred. Just once. But Mira noticed. She didn't lift her head, didn't react. She didn't want to turn that breath into a target. She just wanted to let it be what it was. She quietly opened the journal, not to read, just to look at her mother's handwriting, and imagined the same hands that once wrote those words now resting on Echo's back. So softly. Mira didn't cry, but something in her chest began to loosen, like a thin layer of ice cracking under the first warmth of spring. Maybe it was a feeling that had waited a very long time, not waiting to be answered, but to simply be present when someone needed a silent witness to their pain. Mira had studied animal behavior, anxiety disorders in dogs, and PTSD in socially structured species. She knew the theory by heart. But here, in this hallway, before a creature that had shut down from the world, Mira understood that no textbook could teach her how to sit without expectation. Only memory could. And a little bit of faith, like the way Echo was breathing. Slow, but steady. A small leaf fluttered through the doorway, spinning on the faint breeze. It slipped through the kennel bars, landing on the floor in front of Echo. Mira saw his ear twitch. He didn't lift his head. Just a flicker, enough to say, "I'm still here." She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, her mother's image appeared, sitting beside some kennel 20 years ago, also waiting for a tiny motion, also remembering a rare blink. Not every creature needs to be saved. Some just need someone to witness that they survived. Lillian Caldwell. Mira opened her eyes. In front of her, Echo hadn't moved, but the last light of day had slid across part of his body, and glinted on a patch of worn silver fur where a long scar curved like a handwritten word. She didn't know where that scar came from, didn't know which mission or which person, but looking at it, Mira felt Echo wasn't wounded. He was the wound, still breathing. Time moved slowly. She didn't check the clock. She didn't need to. She just listened to each micro-movement, the soft scrape of a claw, Echo's shallow inhale, and her own heartbeat. Steady, not imposing, just present. As the light faded in the hallway, Mira knew it was time to stand. She slowly closed the notebook, folded her jacket. But before she left, she took one step closer to the kennel. Still not near. Just close enough for the light in her eyes to meet his. One more time. Eyes that weren't beautiful or clear or bright, but held something like the look of someone who had once been left behind and was now wondering if they were allowed to hope for one more chance. "Tomorrow," Mira said softly. Not a promise, not a certainty. It was just an echo sent outward, not in hope of a response, only in hope that the silence would be enough for some creature to hear it and know it was no longer alone. The next morning, Mira returned to the shelter without being asked. She brought with her an old book, not a textbook, not annotated, just a collection of short stories her mother once loved, its cover wrinkled, its spine curved with time. In her mind, she still heard the last moment from yesterday, that cloudy gaze, blinking once, like a quiet knock on a door long closed. The hallway of the isolation wing was still as silent as ever. The morning air carried a cold dampness, the smell of dry cement, disinfectant, and something invisible. The silence of dozens of stories never told. As Mira approached Kennel 14, she didn't look in right away. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew she was being watched. Echo still hid, still curled into himself like a shadow dissolving into the stone wall. But his eyes, for the first time, were fully open, tracking Mira's every movement, not in a defensive way, not with fear, just a gaze, placed exactly where it needed to be, at the right time, not drifting elsewhere. Mira felt that gaze brush across her as she knelt to set her bag down. She didn't lift her head, didn't return the eye contact, but she tilted her face slightly to the side, very subtly, as if to let him see more clearly. In behavioral psychology, this is called intentional eye contact. When a creature moves beyond simply existing and begins choosing where to place its focus, when it no longer turns its face away, it means it has acknowledged the other's existence. Mira opened the book. She didn't sit up too straight, didn't read too clearly. Just soft lines. The girl reached the last village in the valley, where people said those who had lost their names could still hear a calling from the forest. Her voice was just enough to carry a few meters. Not loud, not aimed at Echo. Just a presence made of words, demanding nothing. In the shadows, Echo's eyes still followed her. He didn't come forward, didn't breathe heavier. Just kept that gaze like a thread stretched taut. Mira knew. Not everyone would notice it, but she didn't need grand signs. A lingering look from a creature frozen in trauma was already the first breath of revival. When she pretended to bend down to pick something up from her bag, Echo's eyes tracked her. Still no body movement. But there was a pause in his gaze, as if Echo was waiting to see if she would stay. She noticed. And she stayed. Time passed. An employee walked through the hallway. Echo recoiled, but the moment that person disappeared, his eyes found their way back, to where Mira sat. She didn't smile, didn't say anything else. Just nodded once, just enough to affirm, "I see you." When Mira stood after nearly an hour, the air had shifted slightly, the wind slipping through the kennel bars, lifting a few strands of hair across her forehead. Echo remained in his corner. But this time, as she walked away, his gaze didn't let go immediately. His eyes followed her steps, all the way until her figure vanished from the corridor. It was a very small step. No one else saw it. No cameras recorded it. No one wrote it into the file. But Mira knew. Echo had begun to look. And when a creature starts watching something beyond itself, it has begun rewriting the definition of the world. Autumn winds came earlier than usual. In the mountains of Colorado, the cold waited for no one. It slipped silently into every crack, every fingertip, every breath, and into everything that hadn't yet found a name. Ridge Valley Rescue Shelter was wrapped in the silvery gray of morning mist, as if the whole mountain was holding its breath for something important about to happen. And inside Kennel 14, that something had begun. Not with barking, not with motion, but with movements so subtle you had to be completely still to notice them. Kelsey was the first to see it. One morning, while reviewing the overnight security footage, the slowed recording showed this. At 2:17 a.m., Echo had moved from the corner, where he used to lie as still as a shadow, and walked toward the water bowl. No leaping, no rushing, just 3 steps, small, measured, along the edge of the kennel. He drank, then returned to his corner. But this time he didn't lie down right away. He sat in the posture of a guard dog, ears alert, eyes open, head upright, only for 3 minutes. Then he lowered himself to sleep. "He's no longer just existing," Kelsey whispered to Marlene as she replayed the footage. He adjusted his state, not out of instinct, but by choice. Marlene said nothing. She just watched the shifting gray form on the screen, then turned toward the window looking out to the isolation wing, where Mira Caldwell had sat nearly every day for almost 2 weeks. Mira didn't know about the camera. She didn't know Echo had stood up. But that morning, when she took her usual seat, she sensed that something had changed. Not in the light, not in the sound, but in the very quality of stillness in the space. Echo's breathing was slower now, no longer trembling like before. And though he still curled up, his ears tilted slightly toward Mira each time she spoke. Mira kept the rhythm, like a musician who knows this symphony needs no crescendo, only steadiness. She sat in the same spot, the same angle, back straight, hands resting lightly on her knees, her gaze never directly at him, but every movement carefully measured to avoid tension. The small speaker continued to play instrumental music. Today it was slow piano, paced like a resting heartbeat. The volume was low enough to blend into the sound of wind slipping beneath the door. She didn't read. She only whispered. A few repeated sentences, like lullabies without melody. "It's getting chilly now. Dr. Caitlin's niece got a pair of puppy-shaped mittens today. She says the little one won't take them off, even during lunch." This was a technique Mira had used with severe PTSD patients, especially with the young soldier she helped last year. No conversation, no pressure to open up. Just presence, with a stable rhythm, non-threatening, without judgment. Echo didn't respond clearly, but Mira noticed subtle signs in the smallest details. A flick of the ear when she paused, a change in breath when the piano entered its repeating motif. It wasn't recovery. It was the reflex of a creature slowly relearning how to exist in a world with others in it. And Mira remained there patiently, like a fixed point in a shifting space, because she knew consistency was the first thing to rebuild, even before trust. That afternoon arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening between two beings separated by a wall of iron bars. Mira sat in the same spot. Her shadow stretched long in the fading sun, reaching closer to Echo's kennel than usual. A light breeze passed through the hallway, flipping a corner of the notebook in her hand. But she didn't read. She just sat, like always, eyes closed for a long time, allowing herself to do nothing but be there. Inside the kennel, Echo curled up as usual, front legs tucked in, eyes half closed, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. He had heard Mira from the moment she entered the hallway. That distinct sound she made dragging the chair, not loud, just a soft glide on the floor, the bag being placed down. A light cough, unintentional, then silence. Echo knew all of those sounds. At first they made him wary. Each tiny movement once signaled a threat, a leash, a grip, a syringe, a collar biting into skin. Echo's old world was one of commands and survival reflexes. But now, those sounds no longer made him flinch. They had become familiar. And for the first time, Echo didn't hide from the afternoon light, and didn't hide from Mira's eyes. He lifted his head slowly, very slowly, as if afraid to dislodge something delicate in the air. His ears perked gently. The light filtered through his gray-silver coat, highlighting the old scar on his right shoulder. Echo looked straight ahead. He didn't shift his gaze, didn't glance to the opposite side. His eyes met Mira's, and didn't retreat. For the first time, Echo allowed someone to see him, not just the body, but the part of the soul still sitting within that silence. And that part, though once shattered beyond repair, was still there, fragile, trembling, but looking back. Mira didn't respond immediately. She had read enough, seen enough to know that when a creature who's shut down decides to make eye contact again, the most important thing to do is nothing. No smile, no whisper, no praise. Just stay there, meeting that gaze, with eyes that demand nothing. The moment didn't last long. Echo held it for 3 full breaths. Then he blinked, turned his head away, slowly, without panic. But Mira knew. A door had just made a soft click in the dark. Not because it had opened, but because someone inside had just tried the handle for the first time. The afternoon turned gray. The shadow of the pine tree outside the mesh door stretched across the floor, almost touching the legs of Mira's chair. Echo lay down again. But this time he didn't turn his back to Mira as he usually did. He lay on his side in a half-alert posture, one ear up, one eye still open. He didn't want to lose sight of the one sharing space with him. Mira closed the notebook. Her hands rested in her lap. Still no words. But in her chest, a new rhythm pulsed. The rhythm of someone who had finally been seen again, after so many days of being invisible. That day, when Mira left, Echo didn't move, didn't approach, didn't whimper. But when she disappeared beyond the hallway corner, the security camera recorded. Echo stood up. He didn't walk anywhere, just stepped to the edge of the kennel, the very spot where her gaze had just rested. He stood there for nearly 5 minutes. No barking, no growling, no calling. Just a silent figure in the dusk, standing where Mira's presence had been. Mira wasn't surprised when her phone vibrated on a Monday morning. In clinical animal therapy, cases often shifted suddenly, and more than once, she'd been called to assist with special individuals. But this time, the call wasn't from the shelter, nor from a veterinarian. It came from a coordinator with the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Western Colorado region. "We have a patient from the Veterans Support Program, former Special Forces, currently living in isolation, refusing inpatient care." He's been diagnosed with complex PTSD, with mild neurological damage. The doctor prescribed motor therapy and peripheral sensory stimulation. Mira paused for a few seconds. He agreed to treatment? But he didn't refuse either, and that's more than anyone's gotten from him in the last 6 months. The patient's name was Noah Whitaker, age 37. Status: living alone in a wooden cabin at the northern edge of Glenridge Forest, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town. Background: served in the Middle East, discharged after an IED-related injury. Psych profile: no social contact, hyperreactive to loud noises, signs of chronic insomnia and severe emotional self-isolation. Mira accepted without hesitation, not because the case was easy, but because something in the coordinator's voice sounded just like the way people had spoken of Echo in those early days. Unresponsive? Nothing special? But hasn't shut down completely. On her first morning at the cabin, wind rushed sharply down the mountain ridge. The road leading to the house wasn't paved, just an old trail covered in pine needles. No doorbell, no house number. Just a modest wooden home, 3 creaky steps, and a dust-covered pickup truck parked to the side. She parked a few meters away, pulled her therapy bag from the trunk, and walked to the door. Knocked 3 times, short, gentle. No reply. She raised her hand again, but the door opened from the inside without a sound. The man before her didn't look like a patient. Noah was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark t-shirt and worn khakis, still clean. His face looked gaunt, not from illness, but from lack of sleep and human presence. His eyes weren't red, weren't glazed, weren't wild. They were just silent, like the surface of water stilled long after the wind had passed. Mira gave a faint smile. "Good morning. I'm Mira Caldwell. I've been sent by the VA to assist with your therapy." Noah nodded, didn't invite her in, didn't step aside. After a brief moment of stillness, he turned and walked inside, leaving the door open behind him. The cabin was plain but orderly. Wooden floor, small dining table, mismatched chairs. No family photos. No books, no electronics. Just an old clock and a picture frame turned face down. Mira didn't ask. She placed her bag on the floor and pulled out a few light tools. A softball, resistance bands, a mat towel. "This first session is just for baseline assessment," she said gently, evenly. "No workouts, no contact, just guidance and observation." Noah nodded again. That gesture, Mira noticed, felt more like a military reflex than true agreement. She began by describing each tool, not like teaching, but like storytelling. "This is a rubber ball. It looks like a dog toy, but it's used for wrist tension and tactile reflexes." When she said the word dog, Noah's eyes flickered, just briefly, but Mira caught it. For 30 minutes, she watched, from his eye movements to how he placed his feet. Everything was overly cautious, as if Noah wasn't living, just managing behavior. When the assessment ended, she packed up slowly. Before leaving, she said, "Next time I'll bring a small speaker, play some background sound. It can help stabilize sleep." Noah didn't object. That was the first signal. At the door, Mira glanced to one corner near the steps. There was a stainless steel bowl, upside down, covered in dust, but with visible scratch marks along the rim. As if a dog had once lived there, had eaten there, had been. In her car, Mira didn't start the engine right away. She looked back at the wooden door, now closed, and thought, "That man doesn't need someone to touch him. He needs someone who knows when to step back and when to stay." Mira always believed there are moments that can't be explained with words, only felt. And that morning, when she stepped through the door of Noah Whitaker's cabin for the second time, A chill passed down her spine, one that didn't come from the weather. The cabin was unchanged, the table still bare, the photo frame still face down. Noah stood by the window, looking into the woods. The slanting light hit his shoulder, dividing half his face into shadow. He didn't turn when Mira entered, just nodded slightly. "Good morning," Mira said, her tone even. He didn't reply, but a slight shift in his shoulders told her he'd heard. She laid out the same tools as before. No questions, no pressure. The session was shorter, just 15 minutes. She guided a few neck and shoulder relaxation techniques. Noah followed. No extra movements, none missed. He was like a soldier who still upheld discipline but had detached emotion from every gesture. As Mira packed up, Noah suddenly spoke, so softly she nearly thought she imagined it. "Have we met before?" She looked up. "No. I don't think so." "Your voice," he said, eyes still fixed on the window. "It's familiar." She gave a soft smile. "Maybe. It's just because I'm not trying to sound unfamiliar." Noah tilted his head slightly, acknowledging it, then fell silent again. On the way home, Mira didn't think much of the question. But the strange feeling lingered, like Noah was holding on to a piece of memory he couldn't quite shape. After Mira left the shelter, Echo didn't move again. He sat there a long time, eyes open, but not fully awake. Kelsey watched from the camera. Echo seemed suspended between two worlds, one half still the ghost in the kennel's corner, the other trying to remember something that had been pulled away for too long. Something, once so familiar it had become reflex, a name, a person, a sound, a scent, finding its way back, cell by cell. That night, Echo didn't lie in the corner of the kennel. He lay in the center, right where Mira usually sat, just outside the bars, ears perked, breathing heavy in short bursts, like someone who had just outrun a nightmare and wasn't sure if they'd escaped it yet. When the hallway fan settled into its steady rhythm, he let out a soft whimper. No one heard it. But he did. He heard himself. The next morning, Mira arrived earlier than usual. She wore the same jacket as the day before. She didn't know why. Only that something in Echo's behavior yesterday made it impossible to do otherwise. As she stepped into the isolation wing, Echo was already standing. Not startled. Not fleeing. Just standing. Waiting. Mira stopped at the gate. She didn't sit right away. She slowly crouched, opened her bag, and pulled out a soft cloth. Then paused. Echo took a long breath. He didn't step forward like he had the day before, but his gaze didn't leave her sleeve. Kelsey approached, intending to call Mira into the clinic. But when she saw Echo watching with an intensity that seemed to recognize something beyond scent, she stopped, arms folded. "There's something in that smell," she whispered, "and it's not about Mira." That afternoon, back at her lodging, Mira rummaged through her bag. She washed the jacket, but kept a seat cloth she'd brought the day before, one she had used during a therapy session with Noah. When she held the cloth near her face, she caught the scent of wood, plastic, the fabric of the cabin, and something else, human, indistinct but unmistakable. She couldn't name it, but Echo had recognized it before she did. That night, Mira reopened her mother's journal. She wasn't looking for any particular passage, just turned the pages slowly, as if listening to old breaths. And near the edge of one page, she found this line. "Sometimes the wounded creature doesn't remember the voice, doesn't remember the face, but it remembers the scent of the one who survived alongside it." The next morning, Mira brought the cloth back to the shelter. She didn't hide it. She placed it in a clear plastic bag, slightly open. then sat in her usual chair and gently slid the bag towards the edge of the kennel. Echo came, not fast, not eager. He stepped forward as if walking through his own memory, each step carrying a scent he couldn't name, only knowing it once meant everything he understood about safety. He pressed his nose to the edge of the bag. Stayed there. A long time. Mira didn't blink, didn't move, didn't call out. She just breathed, steady, soft, as if trying to hold the rhythm of Echo's heart so it wouldn't break. And then Echo let out a soft whimper. It sounded like a gasp, but caught in his throat. His eyes stopped on Mira. That look didn't ask. It ached with a quiet question. Is that person still alive? Mira turned her face away. She couldn't bear the weight of such directness. She no longer knew whom she was facing. Echo, or a fragment of memory resurrected from everything that had never been said. When she left that day, Echo followed, to the very edge of the bars. As Mira turned and walked down the hallway, he sat. He didn't return to the corner. He just sat, eyes tracking her, like someone who couldn't leave the place where they'd once lost something important. That night, for the first time in many months, Echo slept without resting his head against the wall. He lay his head on the cloth Mira had left behind. The scent of a stranger. But it was an old Echo, just enough to open a door no one remembered was still there. Mira hadn't planned to ask. At least, not that day. But during the 6th therapy session, when Noah executed a slow arm raise with more precision than ever, as angled sunlight slanted through the wooden frame and scattered across the floor, and soft piano music played gently like a second breath from the speaker. She sensed something beginning to break free from the long silence. No pressure, just a stream of water beginning to seep from a cracked stone. "Have you ever had a dog?" Mira asked, as casually as one might ask about the weather. The question hung in the air for a few seconds, as if it might vanish into nothing. Noah placed the rubber ball down and sat upright. He didn't look at her. "Why do you ask?" Mira didn't look away. "It's just, I noticed you react slightly whenever I mention barking. It's happened more than once." Noah was silent for a while. "Not owned," he said softly. "Worked with." Mira nodded. She waited. Noah leaned back against the wall. His shoulders tensed slightly. Not defensive, more like his body was remembering how to stand in a military corridor, upright, no weakness shown. "Afghanistan," he began. "Last 2 years, I was on a search and recon team. We had a working dog. His name was Shadow." Mira tilted her head slightly. "Shadow," she repeated, the syllable slipping softly from her throat. Noah closed his eyes. German Shepherd. Black coat, gray chest, eyes slightly mismatched, right eye more amber than the left. He had a long scar down his right shoulder. Got hit by debris during our first prisoner rescue. No one retrained him after that, but Shadow still responded to my voice, like he didn't need commands, just my voice. Mira sat very still. She didn't take notes. Her hands rested gently on her lap. She just listened. Noah continued without looking at her. "He wasn't a pet, not friendly. But Shadow, he was a soldier. He never walked ahead of me. Always stayed on the left, about half a step behind. He could read the wind. Warned me even before the detector picked anything up." He gave a faint, joyless laugh. "A few times we made it out alive thanks to Shadow. He never barked. He just looked. And if his right ear moved, it meant I had to stop immediately." Mira felt something tighten in her chest. "The scar on his right shoulder, was it long or deep?" she asked calmly. Noah turned his head towards the window, eyes narrowing. Not deep, but long, darker than the coat. You could spot it from an angle. The room fell into silence for a moment. Then Mira asked gently, "Did you ever try calling him after it happened?" Noah didn't answer right away. "No one let me," he said at last. "After the blast, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was already at the medical base. They said Shadow ran off after the explosion. No one was sure if he'd survived. I was shipped back to the States shortly after. No one ever told me anything more." The air in the room thickened. Not heavy, but like someone had opened the lid of a box they weren't ready to look inside. Mira nodded slowly. Then she spoke, a near whisper. "Do you remember which command Shadow responded to most?" Noah pressed his lips together, his hands clenched on his knees, then released. "Attention." One word, sharp, clear, commanding. He always lifted his head when I said that, like it was the key that powered his entire system. In Mira's mind, images began rewinding. The way Echo had suddenly stood. The way his right ear always perked up every time she came near. That gaze, locked on every movement, the scar, the silent alertness. Uninterested in rewards, but aware of every shift in the air. She inhaled, steadying herself. "Do you have a photo of Shadow?" she asked. Noah closed his eyes. "Maybe. I'm not sure." He stood and walked into the back room. Mira heard the sound of a drawer, rustling paper, a metallic click, like an old lock being undone. When he returned, he was holding a worn leather wallet, carefully tucked inside his jacket. He pulled out a photo. Didn't hand it over immediately. "It's blurry," he said. "Hard to see clearly. Taken outside. Backlit." Then he passed it to Mira. It was a small photo. Faded. A man in uniform, clearly Noah younger, his eyes not yet carrying so much weariness. And beside him, a black German shepherd, standing slightly sideways, eyes looking up, right ear slightly higher than the left. Right shoulder, a dark line running diagonally from the neck down toward the back. Mira said nothing. She just stared at it for a long while, then folded it carefully and handed it back to him. And in her heart, there was no more doubt. Noah turned the photo over again, slid it back into the wallet like closing a door that had swung open too fast. But his hand still held the soft edge of the leather, as if not ready to let go. Mira looked at him. She didn't ask further. Didn't push. The silence between them was no longer the awkwardness of strangers. It had become a necessary space, a pause before something deeply unspoken might finally take shape. A moment later, Mira slowly pulled her phone from her coat pocket. She opened her photo library, scrolling through familiar frames. Each photo had been taken without much thought, just part of her habit of observing, documenting the therapy process. But now, each image might carry a weight she hadn't realized until this moment. She didn't hand the phone over right away. She just set it gently on the table between them. "There's a dog at the shelter. I've been working with him. I don't know if you recognize anything." Noah didn't touch the phone. He looked at her for a few seconds, his gaze pausing at the corner of her mouth, as if reading a line of text only visible to someone who had once lost something too large to name. Then he leaned down and tapped the screen with a calloused finger. The first image showed a side angle. Echo standing, body tilted toward the kennel door, eyes facing the hallway. Not detailed, but enough to see the right ear stood higher. The stance leaned left, a patrol dog's habit. Noah didn't react right away. Mira slowly slid to the next image. Echo was lying down, head resting on his front paws. Part of his shoulder revealed a long, dark scar, running from the neck down toward the scapula. Noah blinked. Once. then looked longer. Mira touched the screen and moved to the third photo. This time Echo was looking up, his gaze straight into the lens. No fear, no avoidance, but no plea either. It was a look that was completely alert, completely knowing. Noah sat upright. His entire body seemed to be pulled out of its defensive posture. His chest rose and fell slightly. His gaze lingered longer on Echo's face. The way Echo looked into the camera, it was exactly how Shadow used to look at him in the desert, when no one else had noticed anything, but the dog already knew something was coming. "No way," Noah murmured, almost inaudible, "but maybe." He leaned back into his chair, eyes on the ceiling. His hand left the phone, but his thumb still trembled slightly, as if it was still touching something that had just slipped away. Mira stayed silent. She knew not to intrude on this moment. The moment when a man was wrestling between logic and what the heart and body had already recognized first. Noah turned back. "Does he have a name?" "We call him Echo," Mira replied softly. Noah froze. "Echo?" "Because he didn't respond to anything, but he was still there, still echoing, like a voice bouncing back from somewhere far away. I don't know why I chose the name at first. It just felt right." Noah bowed his head. His voice caught. "Shadow used to have a habit. If I was silent for too long, he'd come close, not touching, just standing there, like asking, 'Are you still here?' Like an echo. An echo." Neither of them spoke for several minutes, only the ceiling fan's gentle hum, brushing across the wooden floor. Mira placed her hand on the table, not reaching for Noah's, just placing it down. A still point, and Noah looked at that hand, didn't touch it, but for the first time, let his eyes rest there. "Do you want to meet him?" Mira asked. The question came out softly, but carried her entire heartbeat with it. Noah didn't respond right away, but his gaze remained on the dark screen, where Echo still lay in the image. Eventually, he gave a slight nod. Not certainty, not commitment. Just a small movement from someone who hadn't believed he had the right to hope anymore. Isolation Room 2 sat at the end of the west corridor of Ridge Valley Shelter, a rarely used area, now scrubbed, disinfected, and meticulously prepared all morning. Everyone understood. This wasn't a social interaction case. It was a survival trial, not for Echo, but for a piece of memory that had once been the entire world for both man and dog. And if it failed, there might not be another chance. Mira arrived first. She checked everything again: soft lighting, double lock doors, the overhead camera in place. On one side was Echo, transferred from Kennel 14 that morning through a gentle behavior disruption method. No force, only familiar scents and background sound. Echo had been in the room since early morning. By afternoon, he was standing, not pacing, not retreating into corners, just standing, waiting. No one had taught Echo the concept of time, but somehow he seemed to know. Today was not like other days. Noah arrived with Kelsey at 3:14 p.m. A light rain had just passed. The scent of damp earth clung to his shoulders. Sunlight slipped through breaks in the clouds and painted a long streak across the tiled floor, like a thin line dividing past and present. He walked slowly, not from pain, but because he felt he was approaching something he had once thought lost, and feared that if he moved too quickly, it might vanish like smoke. Mira walked beside him, saying little. At the isolation room door, Noah stood still for a long moment. "I'll go in alone," he said. His voice was low. Firm, not persuasive or assertive, just a fact spoken aloud. Kelsey nodded. "There's an emergency call button just beside the door," she reminded. "If anything feels wrong—" "It won't," he interrupted softly. But it was enough to let them know. He didn't need reminders about the boundaries of his own limits. He had lived inside them for too long already. The door opened. The isolation room was so quiet they could hear Noah's skin brush against the metal handle. As he stepped in, the overhead light fell onto Echo, sitting still against the far wall. No lowered head, no growl, no retreat, just silence meeting a figure that had once lived inside him and had never truly disappeared. Noah stopped 5 meters away. His eyes landed on Echo. There was no instant recognition, no cinematic flood of emotion, just stillness, a weight, a desperate holding on to what was still whole after 3 years of absence. "Shadow," he called. One word, very soft. Echo didn't move. Noah closed his eyes, took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he shifted fully into his military tone. Each word crisp, rounded, hard, exactly how he used to speak, on white sand under blazing sun before every operation. Attention, a single command, not drawn out, not forced, just a key turning the exact rusted lock after all these years. Echo blinked. Once. Then lifted his head. It wasn't reflex, not reaction to a call. It was because his body knew. That sound had once meant life. Noah didn't blink, didn't step forward. He stood still, like the period at the end of a sentence that had waited 3 years to be written. Echo stood up. No burst, no tension. Just stood, like someone waking from a dream where everyone had left, and finally hearing the first voice calling them back. His eyes landed on Noah. Right ear raised, body tilted. Left foot stepped forward but didn't go further, as if waiting for a second command. Noah bit his lip. His shoulders trembled, not out of fear, but because he was holding back a flood of emotion with every ounce of training that had taught him never to cry in front of anyone. "Sit." The voice wasn't loud, wasn't commanding. It was simply the echo of a memory once tied to safety, discipline, trust. Echo sat, no hesitation, no confusion, just a smooth, practiced movement, as if it had never been forgotten. The room fell into silence. From the observation window, Kelsey and Mira could only see a man standing in the center of the room, and a black German shepherd sitting before him, as if they had never been apart. Noah knelt. His hands didn't reach out. They simply rested loosely at his sides. Shadow. This time it wasn't a call. It was a whisper, like a quiet reminder to the world he had once been here. And maybe he still was. Echo let out a low whimper. Not from pain. Not a pet's excited cry, but the sound of a soul just released from too many years in confinement. And when their eyes met, no other signal was needed. They recognized each other, not with their eyes, but with something deeper than instinct. Echo remained seated, never breaking eye contact with Noah. He didn't move, but in every muscle, a storm was rising. A chaos not yet voiced, a collision between memory and reality, where the name Shadow had once meant the whole world, and the command Attention had drawn the line between life and death. Noah said nothing else. He remained kneeling, hands relaxed. No summoning, no coaxing. He knew. If this was Shadow, then he didn't need to be convinced, only given a space safe enough for memory to return on its own. Echo blinked, then lowered his head slightly, not bowed but tilted, exactly the way he had been trained when awaiting the next command. Noah didn't speak, just looked, unblinking. Outside, Mira placed her hand against the glass. She didn't know when she had started holding her breath. Kelsey, standing beside her, whispered, "If he remembers, the next second will be the first time his heart hears its own beat again." Echo lifted one front paw, very gently, not like a clumsy puppy, but steady, full of control, as if every step was feeling out emotional terrain. Noah saw it, didn't cheer, didn't cry out. He simply closed his eyes for 1 second, just enough to keep from shattering into pieces. Echo came closer, now only 2 meters away, then stopped. He lifted his head. His eyes were dark, deep like a canyon, but this time there was light rising from within. Noah took a breath, the first time he saw the true look of his old friend. "Shadow," he whispered, no longer a command, just a name carried by 3 years of being erased from files, from dreams, from hope. Echo let out a low cry, a sound pressed from deep inside his chest, and slowly reached his neck forward. His ears trembled, not from fear, but because the memory had just touched the softest place in his mind, the place no one had reached for 3 years. Then he rose fully, his body lengthened, ears perked, chest opened. He was no longer Echo, the creature from Kennel 14. He was Shadow, the soldier who had never left his post. And he looked Noah straight in the eye, as if waiting for just one final signal to return to the world he once belonged to. The space between them was now less than 2 meters, but for Echo, it was the distance of 3 years. 3 years without command, without name. No one to answer that first bark, and no one to hear the growls stifled in dreams. Noah straightened his kneel. He didn't call again. His gaze held no expectation, no pleading. It simply opened, fully, as if all the times he thought he had lost Shadow dissolved into this moment. Echo looked into that man's eyes. No hesitation, no fear, but also no joy, not the kind seen in typical reunions. Because this wasn't a reunion, this was a return to life. Inside Echo, everything ignited like fire-catching wind. No one could see the storm spinning inside him, but it was real. A cry from his chest. Not, "You've come back," but, "Finally, I don't have to wait anymore." Echo stepped forward. This time, he didn't stop, didn't hesitate. Every step was a piece of the road he had stood waiting on for 3 years. And then he ran. Not wildly, not leaping, just a firm, deliberate stride, as if his body had finally been given permission to do what his heart had wanted all along. Noah opened his arms, but before he could brace, Echo was already there. He curled into him, pressed tightly into his chest, head nuzzling into the hollow of his neck, his whole body leaning in as if trying to reclaim the scent of sweat. The scent of the man who had once stood beside him through white sand, gunpowder, and moonless nights. Noah didn't brace. He collapsed forward, and the two crumpled to the floor like something broken, now made whole, and then he cried. No sound, no sobbing, just tears, spilling from the deepest place where he had locked everything away just to keep surviving. Echo whimpered, then pressed even closer. His paw scraped gently along Noah's back, as if to say, "I'm still here. I'm still on watch. I haven't left my post." Kelsey, standing at the window, couldn't hold back. She turned away, covering her mouth, half from emotion, half because she felt she was witnessing something too sacred to watch directly. Mira didn't look away. She didn't cry. But her chest tightened, as if all the days she had sat with Echo in silence, all the moments when he hadn't responded, all the times that had seemed hopeless, had now transformed into a heartbeat pulsing right in front of her. In that room, no one spoke. Only the softest of sounds, Echo's whimpers, mingling with Noah's short, uneven breaths. The sounds of two beings trying to reconnect. Not with language, not with memory, but with something far greater. Survival. Noah raised a hand and gently touched Echo's right ear. He stroked it softly, then rested his forehead against the top of Echo's head. "You're real," he whispered, each word cracking open. "You are real." Echo didn't move. He let him speak, let him tremble, let him shed 3 years in one late afternoon, with sunlight threading through the window, casting a soft glow across their backs like the first peace either had ever known. Mira turned away. She knew. Nothing more needed to be said. Only one truth was unfolding before her, a dog once erased from existence, and a soldier who had once lost himself, now calling each other's names without words. A few minutes later, Noah lifted his head. His face was red, but his eyes shone in a way Mira hadn't seen since they first met. "How did you find him?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Mira didn't answer right away. She looked at Echo, still lying against Noah, his ear flicking gently every time he breathed. "I didn't find him," she answered quietly. "He let me see him, bit by bit." Noah nodded. He didn't ask more, because what he had just experienced didn't need to be explained. It only needed to be believed. And for the first time in a very long time, he could believe again. Echo raised his head and licked Noah's chin. Noah smiled, a tired smile, but a true one. The smile of someone who had walked through darkness and found that the light not only existed but had been waiting in the same place where they last said goodbye. Outside, the wind began to rise. The glass windows vibrated softly, echoes from a world still turning. But in that room, time had stilled at just the right moment, so that two souls could return to each other, no longer pieces of something lost, but a whole, reborn in each other's arms. After Echo lay quietly against Noah, the air in the isolation room shifted. It was no longer a place separating humans from animals, no longer a space for testing responses, but a sanctuary where a soul once left behind had found its reason to exist again. Noah tilted slightly, one hand resting on Echo's back, the other following the rhythm of his breathing. He didn't ask anything, didn't whisper anything more. He just sat there, with Echo, and let himself be touched by the truth. They still had each other. Echo's body trembled slightly, not like before, not with fear. Mira noticed it, the kind of tremor that came during regulation, like a body releasing tension it had held too tightly for far too long. She had seen it before in severe PTSD patients. When the nervous system begins to let go, it doesn't do so quietly. It breaks, like water through a dam. Echo had let go, not just into the arms of his former handler, but into the part of life he'd once lost, now returned intact in a single breath. Outside the window, Marlene had arrived. No one knew when. She said nothing, just stood, hand gripping the hem of her shirt, eyes glazed with tears. She knew, for cases as deeply broken as Echo's, if reconnection was possible, even once, it was a miracle most shelters never got to witness. Mira opened her phone and recorded a short video, just a few seconds. Not to post, not for reports, just to remember the moment a creature once erased by the world became someone's whole world again. In the room, Noah whispered, his voice barely rising from his throat. "You still remember, don't you?" A question, but also a confirmation. Echo whimpered, a single beat, just enough to say, yes. A moment later, Noah looked up at Mira through the glass. There was no request in his gaze, no embarrassment, only a depth of gratitude no words could ever carry. Mira smiled and nodded. "Let them stay a little longer," she whispered to Kelsey. Kelsey nodded, her eyes red. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," she said. The wind whistled through the corridor outside. Its echo felt like it came from years past, from battlefields, from sandstorms, from trucks loaded with the wounded, from nights when no one knew if tomorrow would come. And now, in this quiet, white room, that echo had finally been answered. Echo pressed closer, his paw draped over Noah's leg, a primal gesture, the way a guard dog sleeps next to his partner. Noah leaned in, resting his head against Echo, just like a soldier sleeping beside a comrade in the desert. They lay there, unmoving, each one hearing the heartbeat of the other. No more words needed. 15 minutes later, Noah shifted slightly. Not wanting to startle Echo, he gently began to pull back. Echo opened his eyes, but didn't retreat. He just looked, his head tilting slightly, as if asking, "Is it over?" Noah smiled. "Number just that. We have a whole life ahead of us." Echo stood up, walking beside Noah as he moved toward the door. As Noah reached for the door handle, Echo stopped, then turned his head and looked around the room one last time, as if telling the place that had held his memories, "I won't be coming back." When the door opened and the hallway light spilled in, Noah stood there, Echo by his side, Mira facing them, and in that moment they were no longer handler, dog, therapist. They were survivors who had found each other at the last edge of hope. Mira reached out and touched Echo's neck. For the first time, he didn't pull away, didn't turn his head. He stayed still and gave a small wag of the tail. Not strong, not excited, just a movement of trust beginning to bloom. Echo had returned, not just in body, but to the very person who had once believed he wasn't worthy of being brought back. And Noah, who once thought he had nothing left to hold on to, now stood in the white hallway of a rescue shelter with the first reason to live again. They left the shelter on a late afternoon, under the cold bronze hues of late autumn. Noah's old pickup truck rolled slowly over the gravel road, the window slightly open so Echo could stick his head out, though his eyes never left the front cabin. He remembered that space, even after 3 years, even if every scent might have changed. The map of memory inside Echo had never been erased. Noah said nothing the entire drive. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, shoulders drawn in, not from the cold, but because something too big had just happened, and he didn't yet know where to place it in the mismatched puzzle of his life. When they arrived, Echo didn't leap from the truck like most dogs. He stepped down, exactly like a soldier disembarking from a landing zone. No running, no barking. Just walked straight to the porch steps and stood by the door, like he had done for 2 years before vanishing. Mira followed, keeping a respectful distance. She knew, from now on, every day would be a test, not just for Echo or Noah, but for herself, the one standing between 2 wounds trying to find a way to heal. The first week passed slowly, like early winter fog. Noah remained reserved. He followed therapy protocols exactly, on time, precise, but never told a single story about himself. Whenever Mira asked, he nodded or shook his head, the way soldiers answer orders. He still hadn't spoken Echo's name aloud. But every time he passed by, his gaze paused, just long enough for Mira to know. He was learning how to see a living creature with emotion, not duty. Echo wasn't easy either. He slept in the corner of the house, back against the wall, facing the door. He wouldn't eat with strangers around. He wouldn't come near Mira except during therapy. He acted as if loyalty was something that could only belong to one person, and the rest of the world was a thing that could vanish at any moment. Still, tiny pieces began to shift. On the 3rd morning, While Mira was packing up therapy tools, she dropped a hand roller to the floor. The loud clatter startled Echo. He jumped up and stood between Mira and the window, ears perked, teeth bared in a protective stance. Noah appeared almost instantly. "Echo!" he called, voice low. Echo turned back, eyes still locked on Mira, but his tail had lowered. From that point, Mira began to take note. At night, Echo patrolled the cabin exactly 3 times, always pausing by the west window to watch the forest. When Noah slept, Echo didn't lie next to him, but at a 1-arm distance, close enough to launch forward, far enough not to intrude. Whenever Mira raised her voice during conversation, Echo would lift his head, ears taut, but didn't react if her gaze softened. Noah started keeping the window open during therapy. One day he exposed an arm with a long scar from wrist to elbow. Mira didn't ask. She simply knelt to apply ointment. Echo came forward then, rested his chin on Noah's leg, his eyes facing the door. The gesture lasted exactly 4 seconds. But Mira understood. It was Echo's way of saying, "Someone is still standing guard for you." On the 10th day, Mira offered Echo a rubber toy. He didn't bite it, just glanced at it. But after she turned away, he gently picked it up and placed it on Noah's foot. Mira began implementing a parallel therapy model, unofficial but intentional. She used synchronization exercises. When Noah raised his left arm, Echo was taught to lift his head. When Noah practiced deep breathing, Echo was given a background soundscape, birds, streams, to help sync their heartbeats. She didn't call them exercises, just adjustment moments. And both, man and dog, began to hear each other's rhythm of life returning. One night, a storm rolled in. Mira stopped by the cabin around 7 p.m. to deliver medication. Noah didn't speak, just nodded. She was about to leave when a loud thunderclap boomed from the east, and Echo jumped up. No howling, no panic, just circled to the door and stood still. Noah followed his gaze, then stood too. "He still remembers the forest patrol routine," he said for the first time that evening, his voice quiet. But in his eyes, something had just softened. Mira knew. They weren't healed. Not just because of reflexes. Not because Echo still slept near the door. Not because Noah still couldn't bring himself to touch the photo frame face down in the living room. But because neither of them knew yet whether they were allowed to feel joy again. But what was certain was this: they had begun to live. Echo still kept watch. Noah still stayed silent. Mira still remained patient. And in that small wooden cabin on the edge of the forest, 2 beings who once believed they had lost everything were learning how to exist again. Not as soldiers, not as working dogs, but as souls, learning to call each other by the rhythm of life. One morning, as Mira was guiding Noah through a shoulder and neck regulation exercise on the floor mat, Echo lay nearby, eyes closed, ears relaxed, seemingly asleep. Suddenly, the sound of an ambulance siren echoed through the forest road, rising and then fading. Mira turned her head briefly, but Echo reacted before she could. No growl, no bark, just a leap to stand between Noah and the glass window, his whole body stiff like a coiled spring. Noah froze. His body didn't respond right away. Only when Echo stepped forward half a stride, eyes locked on a void far in the distance, did Noah quickly place his hand on Echo's back. "That's enough," he said softly. "No need to stand guard. This isn't the base." Echo paused. His eyes stayed wide open, but his back slowly eased down, and he sat next to Noah, as if still not entirely convinced by the reassurance. Mira said nothing. She simply took note of the moment with her eyes, then handed Noah a towel to wipe his forehead. "Echo hasn't forgotten," she said quietly. "And neither has your body." Noah nodded. His eyes didn't meet anyone's, but they drifted somewhere far away. That evening, Mira sent a sound file to Noah's phone. No message, no explanation, just a background track of nature, rustling leaves, footsteps pacing evenly, like a forest patrol route. Noah played it after Echo had fallen asleep. The dog lay curled by the window, as always, but that night, when the sound began, Echo didn't get up. He only lifted his head, listened, then rested it down on Noah's foot, for the first time. The next morning, Mira arrived with a hand-drawn sketch, a layout of the cabin. She placed it on the wooden dining table. "I'd like to create a safe zone for Echo. A separate hallway, wide enough, enclosed, not facing the door directly. We can add background sounds, soft materials, give him a place to retreat if everything becomes too much." Noah studied the drawing for a long time. "And me?" he asked. The tone wasn't sarcastic, just an honest question. Mira looked up. "I think you need a way out too." They built that space together over 3 days. Echo watched every step. He didn't interfere, but every time Mira left the cabin, he would circle the area under construction, sniff each corner, then return to his place. On the 3rd day, Noah tried playing music while working on the porch. Echo didn't react. He lay against the wall, eyes open, but no longer in a guard stance. Instead, he glanced at Noah, then rested his head on his front paws, as if saying, "You're still here? That's enough." One afternoon, Mira was writing notes as Noah turned on the TV. It accidentally landed on a news broadcast with footage of war, the sound of an explosion. They didn't turn it off in time. Echo had already sprung to his feet. No howl, no panic. He circled Noah once, then stood facing Mira, eyes wide, mouth closed. Noah approached. He knelt beside Echo and placed a hand on the dog's chest. "It's over now. No more guns. No more blood." His voice trembled, not from fear, but because it was the first time he had admitted that truth to himself. Mira closed her tablet, stopped taking notes. She stepped onto the porch and took a long breath. That day was full of clouds, but for her, it was the brightest day of the entire autumn. Echo changed slowly, not through grand gestures, but through small movements that only someone who had waited long enough would notice. He slept at Noah's feet every weekend, stopped nightly patrols, just one round, then lay still. When Mira left the cabin, he didn't go to the door anymore. Instead, he laid his head on the towel she left on the chair. Each time Noah woke in the night, he didn't jolt upright like before. Because every time he opened his eyes, Echo was lying there, eyes open, watching him. No call was needed, no light, just that presence. And it was enough. And in that cabin, where silence had once been a form of survival, there was now the clink of dishes, the soft tap of Echo's paws across the wooden floor, the murmur of Noah reading therapy instructions aloud, and Mira's quiet laughter every time Echo tried a new toy, only to carry it back to the same corner. None of them were fully healed. But what mattered most was, they no longer carried their wounds alone. The first night Echo slept on the rug beside Noah's bed, everything stayed quiet. He fell asleep earlier than usual. Mira hadn't come that day, only messaged, "Let you two try silence together tonight." Noah smiled. Silence. They had known too much of it. But now the difference was, this silence had someone listening. Near midnight, when moonlight spilled through the window onto the cold wooden floor, Echo stirred. His face twitched slightly. His hind legs jerked in rhythmic pulses, not tremors, but running. His mouth opened, but he didn't bark. Only a muffled growl escaped his throat, like someone trapped in a command never finished. Noah woke. He didn't speak. He simply sat up, watched, then slowly reached out and placed his hand on Echo's back. The moment his hand touched him, Echo flinched. Not out of fear, but as if he thought he was still on duty. Noah whispered, "You're safe now. You're home." The words didn't echo through the room. They seeped into Echo's back, and after a few seconds, he lay down again, head resting against Noah's leg. But his eyes didn't close. They stayed open and looked far, far away. The next morning, Mira arrived early. Noah was feeding Echo. The metal bowl tapping softly against the floor made a strange new sound. "He dreamed last night," Noah said. Mira glanced at Echo, who was eating slowly, chewing each bite as if calculating it. "Running?" Noah nodded. "No howling, but his legs twitched, just like in the desert, after intense missions. He used to dream like that, but only on nights when the orders weren't clear." Mira fell silent. Echo had never been retrained after going missing. No one had guided him to distinguish between danger and memory. He lived with a cache of data no one had yet decoded, and all of it was pouring out in sleep. That evening, Mira brought a small device, an infrared recorder and motion tracker. Noah agreed, not because he trusted technology, but because he needed to know what was still left inside Echo. The results from the first night stunned them. Echo didn't just twitch, he whimpered in a pattern, exactly 3 times, each 23 minutes apart. Mira replayed the audio, slowed it down. A sharp inhale, a low growl. A word, not fully formed, but sounding very close to go. "Retreat command?" Mira asked. Noah frowned. "Maybe, or self-issued. He once got trapped between 2 groups, rigged explosives himself and ran the other direction. No one gave him orders, just gunfire and short signals." They repeated the recording for 3 more nights. Same results. At 1:42 a.m., Echo whimpered, then turned his head toward the door. At 2:05, his legs jerked, his mouth opened, forming something close to drop. At 2:28, Echo stood up, walked a circle around the room, then sat staring at the white wall. Mira stitched the sequence together. Drop, go. Stillness. She suddenly remembered. In military training terminology, drop is the dive-to-cover command. Go is the charge. Stillness is the pause after the initial blast. Echo wasn't simply haunted. He was replaying a mission, not just a dream. But memory encoded in neuromuscular reflex. On the 6th morning, Mira tried something new. She printed a frame from the night camera, the moment Echo stared at the wall. At the cabin, she placed the photo in front of Noah. "What do you see?" she asked. Noah looked. "Echo's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For orders," he said without hesitation. Mira nodded, then placed a map on the table. "Is this the base area you were stationed 3 years ago?" Noah furrowed his brow, then nodded slowly. "It's a simple equation," she said. "Echo's not dreaming. He's remembering. But without language, the memories leak through muscles and reflex." Noah didn't speak for 10 minutes. He just sat there, looking at the map, then at Echo, sleeping by the stove. "We need to know how much he remembers," Mira said quietly. "And whether those memories relate to the day you lost him." Noah nodded, this time without hesitation. Because if Echo still remembered, then maybe something had been missed in the official report. That night, for the first time, Mira witnessed a scene that left her speechless. Echo was sleeping. Suddenly, he sprang up, whimpered softly, walked to the door, and touched the handle with his nose, then turned back, laid down, and stared directly at Noah. He had survived, but he had never forgotten. And now, the memory wasn't just knocking. It wanted to speak. Mira had no idea what to expect when Noah invited her to the cabin that morning. "There's no therapy session," he said over the phone. "Just something small I want to give you." His voice was still low, but the usual compression was gone. For the first time since she met him, that voice held a sense of waiting. Not urgency, not tension, just the hope of someone expecting to be met. She arrived later than usual, not because she forgot, but because she had paused along the forest road, where the day before, Echo had looked after her for a long time before retreating to the porch. She stood there for a few minutes. Echo wasn't there, but in the air, there was a scent that felt incredibly real. The scent of a place where someone once waited for you to return. When she arrived, Noah was on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. Echo lay next to his chair, eyes half closed, tail curled under his feet. The scene was so peaceful, Mira briefly feared that one step from her could shatter it. But as she approached, Echo opened his eyes, looked at her, then gently rose, walked over, and touched her hand with his nose. Not to check, not to protect, just a greeting, wordless but clear. Noah stood and nodded slightly. "Come in," he said. "There's something that needs to go back to the right hands." The cabin hadn't changed much, except for one small detail Mira noticed immediately. The photo that once lay face down now stood upright on the shelf. A photo of Shadow, or rather Echo, during his time as a soldier, captured with Noah on patrol, both looking towards the camera, not smiling but standing like two halves of a single purpose. Noah opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Dark wood, simply carved. He handed it to Mira without a word. She took it gently, as if it held something fragile. Opened it. Inside was a black leather collar, restored. The leather had been cleaned, the worn spots restitched, the buckle replaced, but at the center was the same metal tag, set into the inner band. Echo, TE167. Mira stared at it for a long time. Her fingers traced the engraved letters, not shiny, but sharply defined, as if someone had carefully etched them, stroke by stroke. She looked up. Noah was watching her, not smiling, just looking, quietly, deeply. "This name used to be a command," he said. "Now, it's a call to come home." Echo had come to their side without them noticing. He sat, eyes on the table, not looking at the box, just at Mira's hands, where the collar rested. Mira knelt down. She held the collar in both hands, lifted it gently. Echo didn't back away. She gave no command, spoke no name, just opened the collar, softly, as if placing a promise, then fastened it around Echo's neck, slow, firm, without excess motion. The buckle clicked with a tiny sound. Echo didn't react, he just stood still, and after a second, lifted his head. Mira placed her hand gently on his neck, over the collar. There was no leash, no tracker tag, no QR code, just one engraved line, and a heartbeat returning to the people he had chosen to accept. That afternoon, all three of them sat out on the porch. Mira, Noah, and Echo, together on a thick blanket, sunlight filtering through the trees, scattering golden patterns across their shoulders. Mira placed her phone on the opposite chair and set a timer. "We need a photo," she said. Noah tilted his head. "For what?" Mira smiled. "To remember that there was a day when everything we thought was impossible became a family." The photo captured that moment, Echo lying between them, eyes closed, ears relaxed, head resting on Noah's thigh, tail brushing Mira's heel. No one looked at the camera. Only the light, falling at that precise moment, seemed to affirm, "I saw this, and it was real." The following week, Noah moved into a new cabin, still in the woods, but closer to town. He didn't give a reason, only said again, he needs more sunlight. The photo was printed in large format, framed in wood and hung in the living room. That wall had once held medals, duty charts, news clippings. Now there was only one photograph, and beneath it, a single line. "Where it ends is where we begin again." The first spring morning after the long, cold year. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, glowing over every line Mira was writing in her mother's old cloth-bound notebook. The pages had yellowed, the corners worn. Some were smudged with old ink stains, where her mother once documented sessions with abandoned animals at Ridge Valley Shelter. Back then, her mother wrote about a stray dog and a reclusive orphan boy. Now, Mira was writing about a dog who used to be a soldier, and a man who once believed he had already died inside. She placed her pen on the final page and inhaled slowly. Outside, the leaves rustled gently. Echo lay by the door, eyes half closed. Noah was fixing part of the fence in the back garden, a task he never thought he'd do again. Mira wrote, "Mom once healed here, and I've continued that, with a dog who had forgotten how to live and a man who didn't want to. But not with knowledge or technique. With time, with gentle repetition. With silence long enough for someone to speak their pain. With their eyes, with their breath. And with a voice echoing from the past that everyone thought was lost." After placing the final period, Mira didn't close the book. She left it open. Next to a newly printed photo, the one Noah had framed just yesterday, Echo lying between them, eyes closed, wearing the Echo TE167 collar, bathed in quiet light, as if the world itself had confirmed. He had found where he belonged. That afternoon, they visited the Community Veterans Center in the nearby town. Unlike Mira's first time there as a volunteer, this time, Noah and Echo came along as newly registered members of the PTSD Animal Assisted Therapy program. The first person they met was an elderly man in a wheelchair named Hank. He had been an artillery gunner, hadn't spoken in 4 months. Echo stepped forward, not too close, sat exactly 1 meter away, and waited. Hank looked at him, didn't bow, didn't smile. But 10 minutes later, he said to Mira, "He can stand guard for me, yeah?" Every week they visited the rehab camp once. Echo wasn't the playful, tail-wagging kind. He didn't perform tricks, but he watched, listened, sat quietly beside them. One young veteran once said, "He's like me. Doesn't want anyone too close, but doesn't want to be left alone either." Mira didn't do anything dramatic. She simply walked alongside them, with her behavior tracker and a new notebook. Noah began opening up in small ways, not about war, but about how Echo reacted to light, to classical music, how he always sat in the one corner that shielded the sleeping person from the afternoon sun. Those little stories made others start telling their own. One afternoon, Mira heard laughter from 3 men who had only known silence and cigarette smoke before. Echo lay in the middle, tail sweeping lightly across the floor. She sat quietly in the doorway, hand resting on her notebook. And for the first time, she thought, her mother must be smiling. By late spring, Ridge Valley Shelter received a grant to expand into a full recovery center for both people and dogs. Mira took on the role of coordinator, on one condition. We need both Echo and Noah. Neither refused. Noah wasn't a speaker, but at the opening ceremony when invited on stage, He said only one sentence. We survived. And now, we want to help others live again. Echo stood beside him. Didn't bark. Didn't lower his head. Just looked up toward the crowd. And someone in the audience began to cry. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Mira, Noah, and Echo sat on the center's front steps, each holding a cup of warm tea. So we begin again, huh? Mira asked. Noah nodded. But not from the start, he said. We begin where we once thought it had ended. Echo rested his head on her knee. She leaned down, fingers grazing the collar on his neck, now darker with age, but the engraving TE167 still visible. She whispered, You're not just a tag anymore. You're a sound, the only sound left that helped us find each other again. That night, seated beside the open window, moonlight falling on a blank page, Mira wrote, No one knows who they'll become after trauma. Some vanish, some hide. But some, like Echo, like Noah, return not to tell old stories, but to help others avoid the place where they once got lost. She paused, added one final line, small and quiet, because sometimes the only echo left from the past is the sound that guides us home. The end, but not a closure. Because from now on, whenever someone stands on the edge between wanting to live and not, they'll have a place to go. And there will be a dog, not barking, not wagging his tail, just standing there, waiting